Okay, so we're going to plan and learn how to write the most important question in your exam paper. It's worth 20 marks, which is a huge amount, almost verging on half of the marks in this entire paper. Not only that, but exactly the same question style is used again in another one of the modules. So if we can crack it now, you'll have got 40 marks of the whole exam paper sorted. And if you can learn the structure and how to do it, then all you need to do is slot in the different knowledge every time. So I'm going to use this document that I've created. I'm going to take you through it step by step and hopefully really explain and help you be able to do this for yourself. So the question we're going to write is this one. The main reason for tension between East and West between 1945 and 1949 was the issue of Berlin. How far do you agree with this statement? Now, every 20-mark question will be like that. It will have a quotation and a how far do you agree. So you're given a point of view and you have to decide if you agree with it or not, okay? You get 16 marks for content, for what you are writing, for the arguments you are making, the analysis that you're doing, and there are 4 marks available for your spelling and your grammar. Technically, that means if all you wrote was the introduction, but you did it in perfect English, as long as you've written enough, which is about 5 sentences, you can get 4 out of 4 for spelling and grammar, which actually is quite a significant amount of marks. So it's really important on this question to think about how you're writing and what you're writing, especially if you know that you're quite able to write well quite easily. That's a very easy 4 marks to pick up. So in the exam, you'll have about 25 minutes to do this question. So you get the longest amount of time for any question that we do, but it's still a time where, you are up against it with time a little bit. You need to be really focused in how you do it. In terms of a very basic structure, you need an introduction, 3 or 4 paragraphs, and a conclusion. Okay, so it's very simple in that sense. I think most people will lean towards 3. I think actually trying to do 4 is too much. You won't be able to do it. It won't be as good. So I would suggest for all abilities, for all grades, you go for 3 paragraphs. Right. I have listed here for you some of the key knowledge I think you're going to need. Now, my suggestion would be you don't even attempt to start this until you have reread your notes on the Berlin blockade. We're looking at the issue of Berlin between 1945 to 1949. So predominantly we're going to be talking about the Berlin blockade. In my plan, I haven't done this, but if you want to, you could also discuss the issue of Berlin in terms of how it's discussed and talked about at the peace conferences, Yalta and Potsdam, because that still is the issue of Berlin. But I don't think you need to do that. I haven't done it. I wouldn't bother doing it personally. I would stick to the Berlin blockade being our factor that's in the question, and then worry about other factors in a moment, okay? So you need to know and understand the Berlin blockade and why that led to tension. Now, I've given you a couple of summary points here. So I think before you start in your revision that you would have done for your exam, you need to know that the Berlin blockade was the first real moment of crisis. Up until now, we've never really had a point where it looks like war was possible. We're still kind of on that tightrope of alliance. We're still allies. We've just come out of the conferences. We've just come out of the war. Nothing's really happened to show that actually these two sides are opposed to each other yet. So that's really important to us. It's important to remember that Stalin has become quite isolated by the West. We've had the formation of Trizonia. We've had the new currency. West Germany is recovering, becoming stronger. East Germany is significantly weaker and isn't regenerating in the same way. Stalin views this as a threat, as antagonistic, as something done against him, rather than something, which he maybe take inspiration from and join. He very much isolates himself from that. It shows the level of aggression and the level of conflict really that Stalin was willing to do. He was willing to cut off 2.5 million people from food and fuel. They could have died, they could have starved. It was always going to be a game of who gives in first. It also shows the West's commitment to the Truman Doctrine. Both Truman and Attlee absolutely point blank refuse to give in to Stalin. They do not give up their part of Berlin. Instead, as we know, they launch Operation Vittles. They fly 8,000 tons of supplies into Berlin. They do the Easter Parade. They do all these things to show that they are not going to give in and surrender to communism or to Stalin. So it really is important in shifting those power balances and those perceptions of each other, and the idea of all of those kind of things coming together. In terms of consequences, it's really important again because it led to the formation of NATO. Now, NATO clearly shows a division of Europe. You're in NATO or you're not. As we know, 1955, the Warsaw Pact is formed. We're not going to talk about that in this essay because it doesn't come within our date range that we were given, 45 to 49. But in terms of consequences, they're quite clear and they're quite persuasive. Overall, I think in terms of the Berlin blockade, the very clear argument is that it was the first moment of crisis. It was very much a turning point or a watershed moment in how the two sides treated each other. It very easily could have led to war. If they'd have had to protect their people. I think we can probably hypothesize that it was a moment where war could have sparked, and it was the first time that happened. Whatever was happening in Eastern Europe, we know the West were not willing to go to war over that. However, Berlin, their own people essentially, even though they're Germans, part of American and British territory at that time, that was different. So that's a summary that I've given you. I need you to make sure you've looked in your notes and you understand all of that and you can write about that in itself, okay? When we've thought about the main factor, the factor in our question, the issue of Berlin just here, when we've thought about that part, we then need to think about what are the other alternatives. So do you think that it was Berlin, or are you sitting there thinking, actually, I think it might be something else? We have to talk about other things, so we need to list them. We need to think them through in our head. So I've listed for you here the possible alternatives to the Berlin blockade, other things that cause tension in that 4-year span in our question, okay? So there is 0 point talking about anything outside of this range. We have to stick to this. So what I've said happens in those years is the peace conferences, the dropping of the atom bomb, the Iron Curtain, the Truman Doctrine and the Marshall Plan, and the formation of COMCOM. We can also have NATO, okay? So I'm going to then pick a bit later on from a couple of these on what I want to also talk about. Now, the last thing you have to think about before you start is, what is your opinion? I want you to tell me your opinion in your introduction. I want to know from the beginning, and I want to see a clear thread all the way through your answer. What do you argue in the beginning? How do you connect that with the other paragraphs you're including? And then how do you finally ram it in my face, hammer it home? I talked about when I was at school the idea of a pond. You're on one side of the pond, you have to get to the other side of the pond. You need to build your stepping stones to get there. There's no point leaving all this empty water because you're never going to make the jump. Okay, you have to build stepping stones. Those stepping stones are your paragraphs, and those stepping stones have to connect to each other. Every paragraph is a block, a stepping stone in your essay to get to the finish. We start at the same place, we finish in the same place, and we build the essay to get there. Okay, really important. Before you start, decide what you think. Either you agree or you disagree. It's that simple, really. You agree or you disagree. I'm going to write the essay from a perspective that I agree with this statement and that I do believe it was the Berlin blockade that was the biggest cause of tension. If you don't agree with me, write me a different essay. I'm all ears to that. There really is no right and wrong in these answers as long as you can justify yourself, okay? If you are looking for grade 7 to grade 9, you need to now think of a slightly more interesting answer than just saying it was the Berlin blockade. That was the main cause of tension. You need to think in your head, why? Why is it that the Berlin blockade was the biggest cause of tension? And what I need you to do then in your introduction, just a couple of sentences, is tell me what you think. So I've given you some guidance for your introduction. I want 2 or 3 sentences introducing the debate, giving your view. Try to embed the quotation. I think this is a very easy way of showing that you are engaging with the question immediately. It shows the examiner straight away that you're going to be answering directly that question. And I think it's just a really good, simple way of showing a sophistication of writing as well, because you can embed a quotation. Throughout the essay, especially in the introduction, avoid using I. We don't want to say I will argue, I believe. You can say one might argue, or some may suggest, or you can simply kind of weave your argument into statements in a way that I kind of do. So I'll show you that. Now, I've written an introduction for you. I would prefer it if you write your own. If you're really struggling, you can use mine just for tomorrow and just for today and this piece of work. But in future, this is what we want to achieve. So, the Berlin blockade clearly escalated tension between East and West between 1945 and 1949. It was the first main crisis of the Cold War and saw Stalin from the USSR and Truman, USA, in direct opposition for the first time. Arguably, it was, quotation, the main reason for tension in these years, as although many events such as the dropping of the atom bomb, the inability of Stalin to keep promises, and the antagonistic nature of the Truman Doctrine all escalated tension, it was the Berlin blockade that saw the tension reach a watershed moment. Before the blockade, tension was unannounced and full of subtleties. The leaders were perhaps still playing at allies. However, after the blockade, the conflict was clear. Now, that's very clearly a grade 9 answer, not trying to beat my own trumpet. But what I've done is I've included quite a sophisticated argument there. I have put down why I think it's the Berlin blockade, and I think it's the Berlin blockade because that was the moment where conflict really could have happened for the first time. All the other things led to that conflict. I'm not denying that. I'm not taking away from that. They were the foundations to build to that conflict. But it wasn't until the Berlin blockade where we actually could have had a war. Okay, and that's my argument. So I've clearly put that into a short paragraph as my introduction. Paragraph 1. You should always engage with the factor in the question first, whether you agree with it or disagree with it. Okay. It just makes for a much clearer argument, and it shows again you're engaging with the question. So we want to engage with the Berlin blockade. Why was that a cause of tension? What did that do? We need to persuade the reader that this is the case. We need to present all our reasons. We need to include lots of evidence and specific details. Grade 7, grade 9, you will get points. And you will get the highest grades by putting in those details, by putting in how many tons of food was brought in, by putting in how many people were cut off, by putting in the name of the operation, Operation Vittles. Okay, all of those specific facts, that's what I need to give you the highest grades. Every time you start a paragraph, one thing that I absolutely have to have is a topic sentence from you. Okay, I will say this so many times. A topic sentence is an opening sentence to a paragraph, and it should summarize that entire paragraph in one go. So very clearly, if all I did was read your topic sentences, I could essentially put together the argument you're writing. Now, I've given you this one in green. You can copy it if you like this time. And I've written, the Berlin blockade was the main cause of tension because it was the first moment that the conflict and possibility for war occurred between the USA and the USSR. Well, that's exactly the argument I told you in my introduction. It's exactly the argument I told you I wanted to present. All I've done is put it into one sentence, okay? Not very tricky. We can all do that. After you've got your topic sentence, your main opening sentence that already tells me what's coming, you need to then put in your facts. So we need now an explanation of why this was the case. You can use any of these sentence starters. It caused tension because, this led to, this changed things because, and you basically need to now explain what happened in the Berlin blockade. Again, I've put for you some key knowledge. I've just copied it from up here so you don't have to move up and down your page. I just need you to put this into a paragraph and explain to me, using these sentence starters, why this means that it caused tension. Okay? Lastly, before we finish a paragraph, as important as the topic sentence is the linking sentence. You need to link it back to the question and explain yet again in a sentence why the points you've just made links to the question. So I've written, therefore, the Berlin blockade was the main cause of tension because it saw Stalin and Truman both refuse to give in, and this was the only moment in these years where their opposition could have escalated into full-on conflict. Yet again, the same point, isn't it? Conflict could have led to conflict, could have led to conflict, okay? Clearly, my stepping stone on my pond has been laid. Paragraph 2, you need to pick another factor. Now, you can pick any one of these. I'm going to start with the Truman Doctrine and the Marshall Plan because I think that's the easiest. So, we're giving a counter-argument, picking another factor and arguing how that can be interpreted as a cause or the main cause of tension, depending what your argument is. Again, topic sentence, reasons, linking sentence, okay? I've written that, you can take that. I've written that, you can take that, which leaves this. Why did the Truman Doctrine cause tension? So you need to sit there and think, why did the Truman Doctrine lead to tension? Well, how did Stalin view it? He saw it as dollar imperialism. It meant that many countries in Europe were able to regenerate and become stronger, become buffer zones to America and Great Britain in between Stalin and them. It halted the domino effect. It caused I'm rambling now, but there's loads and loads of things that you can include there. Again, a linking sentence, absolutely essential to put that in. Now, I'm going even less help for you because I think by now we should have got this. Paragraph 3, a final factor. Pick another one. Pick the atom bomb. Pick the, Stalin's operation in East Europe where he's turning countries communist, he's leaving soldiers in there, it doesn't matter what. And write me exactly the same structural paragraph about that one. When we did our work on the atom bomb, we did this activity, so you could pick the atom bomb and think about why that caused tensions, because we already went through that. Finally, the conclusion. Now, this is potentially the most important part of the whole thing. You need to ram home your argument. I need to be, without a doubt, believing you that your opinion is correct. We've written 3 paragraphs, 3 different factors. Now, depending on what your opinion was, whether you agreed or not with the opening paragraph, your argument might be strong or it might be a bit weaker. If you disagree with the opening statement, you can start your first paragraph, your first factor that links to the factor in the question, and you can tell me why it's important, but then you can very quickly go on to say it's not as important as this because of this reason, and that creates quite a persuasive argument. On the other hand, if you've done what we've done and you agree with it, it could leave your examiner a little bit confused because they've read a really good paragraph on why the Berlin blockade was the main cause of tension. Then they've read 2 paragraphs about why other factors could also be important causes of tension. So if that's the case, then this conclusion is where you really need to prove what you have said in your introduction and what you've said in your paragraph 1 is true. So I've had a go at writing one for you as an exemplar. So in conclusion, despite the weight of other factors in causing a foundation of tension that Stalin undoubtedly reacted off when he launched the Berlin blockade, there is no doubt that the blockade caused the most tension. Whilst the Truman Doctrine caused frustration on the part of Stalin, it did not almost lead to war, whereas the blocking off of 2.5 million inhabitants and their potential starvation could have resulted in far greater consequences. This shows that the Berlin blockade was the main reason for tension between East and West between 1945 and 1949. Okay, so I've just tried to ram that home. I've tried to really hit whoever's reading this in the face with my argument. I've said why the other factors weren't as important. I've said why my factor is as important. And if you'll notice, it's exactly the same thread that I wrote here, okay? We don't want to suddenly change and jump in a different pond. We're sticking to the same pond, we're sticking to the same argument, whatever that argument may be. Hopefully that has explained and made things clear. If you're still having problems, obviously please ask me questions and get back to me. Otherwise, I hope you enjoy.